Hi and welcome everyone to the concurrent session on room 4. Today we will discuss a little of nutrition as a key element of child and adolescent health. My name is Daniela Meneses. I am a youth member of the Global Planning Committee, and today I will be the moderator of the sessions. These concurrent sessions bring together diverse professionals, experiences, and perspectives. They examine new research, evidence, and strategies and practices, and they also help in the engagement with peers on emerging issues. I want to thank all the participants who have joined us and our outstanding speakers who will be sharing their experiences with us over the next hour. We encourage you to all actively participate, ask questions, and share ideas with our presenters. So please use the chat bot. There's also a Google Doc link that would be shared with you where you can type in your questions and comments during the presentations. So without further ado, we will begin our first presentation on learning together about social norms for high quality SBC on child health and nutrition, for which I'm pleased to introduce you to our first speaker, Lisa Sherburne. She's from USAID Advancing Nutrition. Over to you, Lisa.
Thank you so much, Daniela. So we're really glad today to talk with you, as Daniela said, as colleagues, because we're in the process of learning about the role of social norms and expectations on nutrition. And we started this endeavor by all agreeing that we can really see and understand that culture and expectations and our social interactions and social structures for sure influence nutrition in a big way, but how programs can effectively understand and respond to social norms was a big question for us. So I'm going to share my screen so that I can clearly introduce you to our speakers today. I'm really glad to share these speakers who are thoughtfully learning together on how to respond to social norms for nutrition. Jamie Greenberg is with the Institute for Reproductive Health at Georgetown University. Kate Dickin is a professor at Cornell University. And Yoon Porn is working now with the Cambodia Nutrition Project. And Laura Itzkowitz at USAID Bureau for Global Health will join us hopefully for the discussion portion. Our plan for these 30 minutes is for Jamie to give an overview of social norms from the reproductive health perspective. We're learning, kickstarting our work in nutrition by learning from Passages Project and reproductive health so we can catch up to where they are. And then we'll share what we know so far on social norms, especially for child nutrition, as this is a new area in general. And then Yoon will give us a real example from Cambodia, and we'll save at least 10 minutes for questions, answers, and discussions. So as Daniela said, please do share your thoughts, experiences, and ideas or questions in the chat throughout the session. And then when we get to that discussion portion, you're welcome to unmute and speak directly to our great speakers. So I'm really glad to hand it over to Jamie now.
Thanks so much. Do you mind if it's easy just going to the slideshow tab and presenting it as from this slide, so then it'll go across? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm Jamie. I'm excited to be here with you all to talk a little bit about social norms and their influence. Next slide, please. So what are social norms? Before I give a formal definition, I'd like to generate ideas with this group. So in the chat, could you, or actually, why don't you go ahead and unmute and share. Tell us what you see in this photo, which as a leading comment was taken in spring of 2020, and what it might tell you about social norms. So please just feel free to unmute. So one thing we might think about is what might have changed both between January 2020 and between March 2020 and now in what you see in this photo. How we greet each other has changed greatly in many places. Yes, absolutely. That's a great observation. Another thing we could think about is look at the people who are standing around these two people elbow bumping. How do you think they might react if these people shook hands or even hugged? And Daniela says it's linked with the culture, and that is absolutely true. Handshaking is a standard greeting in the United States and some other countries, but not everywhere. Okay, any other thoughts about this picture? And please feel free to shout them out. Okay, definitely keep chatting, but I'm going to share a more formal definition. Lisa, could you just hit the click and it will appear. Okay, so social norms are the often implicit and informal rules that most people accept and abide by. They're influenced by belief systems, perceptions of what others expect and do, and by positive and negative sanctions, or perceived positive and negative sanctions. So an example of a social norm relevant to nutrition might be a mother saying that in my community, mothers-in-law and men make the decisions for what to feed their families. So this is an expectation about what others do in this community. Another part of this norm might be the mother reporting that if I were to make this decision for what to feed my family, others in my community would think I was greedy. So these are the perceived negative sanctions of not performing the behavior associated with that norm. It's important to note that norms are associated with a reference group, which are the people who matter to an individual for a certain behavior. In the example that I just gave, the community is the reference group for this norm. It's also important to note that norms are embedded in formal institutions as well, not just informal. So for the example we just used, food assistance to improve nutrition might be distributed to men, and that would reflect that this norm is institutionally embedded at the organizational level as well, and is being reproduced and perhaps entrenched in this community. Next slide, please. And you can click in advance. So people comply with norms for a variety of reasons and might do this even if they disagree with the norm, because norms don't control everything. So I'm going to quickly talk through some reasons for this, but I'd like you to look at the picture again and think about why these people might perform this behavior even if they disagree with the norm that underlies it, and share your thoughts in the chat. So social norms might not be detectable for those not looking for them. We might not have examined our behaviors. We might be aware that social norms exist, but have a strong desire to conform to our social circles regardless. The sanctions, positive or negative, of our reference group might be more important to us than defining social norms. And finally, we might, oh, sorry, one more advancement, please. Sorry. Finally, no, that's on me. Finally, we may lack power or agency within various group structures to define these norms. Next slide, please. So now that we have a very basic understanding of what social norms are and how they may shape behaviors even for people who disagree with them, we might have a better sense of how important they are for SBC efforts. So this slide represents how social norms influence behaviors for a range of outcomes. We'll let you read through it as I talk through it and provide a quick nutrition example. So the outcomes at the right reflect common sectors in global health and some associated behavior change goals. Then moving left, the path to obtaining these outcomes is a range of intermediate effects. Then all the way to the left, influencing the achievement of both these intermediate effects and these outcomes are what we might call norm domains that are related to these behaviors. So we'll think of the example that we used before, which is the outcome of improving maternal and child nutrition in a community where men and mothers-in-law control family nutrition. So if we look at the intermediate effects that might be associated with this, we could identify social and economic capital, women's agency, couple communication, and decision-making. You could probably make the case that the other intermediate effects are implicated as well. Then, if we look at the norms that influence maternal control over family nutrition, we can see that norms related to girls' education, family formation, GBV, masculine and feminine ideologies, and power hierarchies may all have bearing on this outcome and the intermediate effects associated with it. So we can see that many norms touch on this one outcome, and shifts in these norms might have behavior change implications. We can also look at this from left to right and see that it's also true that social norms can influence many outcomes. So for example, shifting norms around feminine ideologies may impact many or even all of the intermediate effects and outcomes, including nutrition. So to talk a little bit more about the norms that relate to nutrition, I'm going to hand it over to Lisa. Thank you, Lisa.
Okay, thanks, Jamie. So for too long, programs have really focused on providing information or education to individuals without really understanding or responding to the norms that influence, support, or sanction people's nutrition behaviors. But what we can see is that if motivation for a behavior is rooted in social norms, then just providing more information is unlikely to overcome the barriers to change. And we need to use this good evidence from other areas, such as reproductive health that Jamie just shared, because in nutrition, there has been a lack of evidence on social norms. But one thing that is something to consider as we think about nutrition, especially child nutrition, is that the pathways to norms are through the caregivers. Children depend on their caregivers for feeding, services, and care. And so we need to think about these caregivers and how are they influenced by the range of social and gender norms and expectations. To better understand norms and child nutrition and identify gaps and recommendations, a review is coming out soon. Kate Dickin, who will join us for the discussion portion of this session, led a scoping review on social norms and child feeding. It explored child feeding for children between 6 and 24 months and interventions promoting improved child feeding using norm-focused approaches. The review included both published and gray literature. The preprint version of this is now available, and it'll soon be published in Current Developments in Nutrition. So one of the big findings from the review is that social norms influence child feeding in three main ways. There are norms around what children are fed, around when and how children are fed, and who is responsible for the feeding. The review identified 18 programs with at least one component addressing norms, 9 in sub-Saharan Africa and 9 in Southeast Asia. Most programs aim to impact a range of complementary feeding practices and did so by addressing norm-related beliefs on appropriate foods for children, cultural traditions and taboos, and family and gender roles. What's important is that the interventions went beyond individual knowledge, attitudes, and skills. And there were two main categories of intervention approaches. One was community engagement, often including dialogue with influential community members. And the second was use of media, including narratives that dispelled negative social norms and strengthened the positive ones. In both types of interventions, it was important to address norms directly and build positive norms that support improved child feeding. Overall, we can say that the review findings were positive but limited because very few evaluations measured impacts on norms to see if change occurred and if it was related to the changes in practices. What we can say is that if norms are relevant, then SBC should include attention to the norms that are influencing behavior by correcting misperception, shifting what others think, and building support for the positive norms. And in the long run, we need to aim for broad acceptance of the positive norms at the community level. So now I will hand it over to Yum, who will give us an example of his experience in Cambodia.
Thank you, Lisa, for giving me a floor for this discussion. So, good evening, everyone. I would like to share some experience from the Nourish Project, which funded by USAID and Future since last 4 or 5 years ago until 2020. So, actually, you know, regarding to social norm that I would like to say is about small fish powder. About small fish powder, about small fish which you know, like available in Cambodia at the rice field, at the pond, or at the canal actually. But however, only 1 and 2 children for the rural community eat the fish, because the barrier, including fear children choking and take some time for prepare prepare and this for the children. And actually for the USAID Nourish Project, which led by Save Children and other local organizations, include the Men of Group and so on, we have sustained solution for small fish powder, which roasting and pounding for storing for 4 months in lean season. And they have some norm that affect to the child in nutrition. One is parenting. It actually in Cambodia, according to the local traditional, and they normally buy packaged food with sukari and cook with the watery porridge, and not to try talking too much for the baby even they providing small feeding to the children. It meant that they rush to feed. For the gender, and actually for the pregnant women who normally deliver for 3 or 4 months, and normally they stop to feed the baby and they go to work at the right field. So this is no one take care the children for daily. And for the another norm which affect the child nutrition is about food taboo, which they believe that they don't provide fish to the baby. They believe that the baby will get the worm and will be get sick, for instance. So how can we address this norm in local context of Cambodia in the Nourish Project? One is we try to incorporate the group even and take some family in led by the local group for joining the conduct community dialogues and produce small fish powder and inform market and so on. We also promote with small fish, including with the food basket, who family which accomplish the behavior, who are champion. We provide small fish with the food basket, including vegetable, and so on. We also create the innovative idea as the children story, which regarding to the girl who dream to be the doctor, but they need to ensure that they eat small fish to be smart, and so on. We also include with the TV sport airing and champion family, for instance. And after from the intervention, we can see the result from the baseline in line survey. It actually for the child from 3 to 6 months. For the MAD, it actually increased, between 25 to around 50. So this is very critical. And for the child at 9 to 11 months, this is a critical issue in Cambodia based on Cambodian Democratic Health Survey. It found that this age is very critical and stunting. So it's also increased from 46 to almost 90%. So this is from the best practice that I would like to share from short piece in Cambodia so far. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Yum. Before we get to the discussion, we wanted to highlight a few excellent places for additional resources that we're also using to learn. The Learning Collaborative to Advance Normative Change on the Align platform has a whole host of excellent resources, and the Passages Project also does. And then the preprint version of the article we mentioned, the link is also here. But if you subscribe to the USAID Advancing Nutrition Resource Review listserv, we'll be sure to send you the article as soon as it's fully out. So now we're here for questions, answers, and discussion. And I welcome Kate Dicken to join the discussion as well.
Great. Should we take questions from the chat?
Sure, we can start there. And then anyone who wants to share your experience or ask a question, please also feel free to unmute.
All right, so Kate Litvin is asking a question that I think she knows the answer to, but we can take a stab at it. And it would be great to hear the responses of people who have experiences with trying to address social norms. I think really from the review, we found that multi-channel approaches where you're directly tackling norms are the key. If you just talk about what people should do it without really digging into why people are doing it, is it because they don't want to be different from everyone? Well, then you need to create a group or create a movement so that they don't feel alone. Are they not willing to change this behavior because of sanctions, as Jamie mentioned? Well, maybe you need to work with the grandmothers or the husbands in that case. But this approach of using mass media to build social norms, to build positive norms through sort of anecdotes and stories, and then direct community level action to really get people talking about norms and how to address them, seems to be a very common approach and an effective approach. But it'd be great to hear from people about what they've tried to do to address some of these sometimes not very conscious reasons that are holding people back from making behavioral change.
Hello, good morning. My name is Juan Gutierrez. I'm from Madra, Venezuela. We have designed, you could say, a board game to interact with different family members, and in a way they could understand a nutritional basis, not just for children under 5 years of age, including adolescents and other ages as well. So interacting with the family, not just by social media, but in a way that they could play and learn from playing, that helped us out a lot.
Yeah, games are a great way to do this kind of thing, because you get to try a behavior without it actually having real life repercussions and explore that. And doing it with the family sounds wonderful.
Sure does. Kate, there's a question for you about children helping with caregiving and feeding. And Claire Hanbury says her work in Mozambique saw young adolescents being very influential in feeding children. Did any of the research cover that?
Yeah, great question. I'm
Oh,
trying
Claire,
to,
please join in.
yeah. I'm trying to think back. I don't remember research on that. It'd be interesting to see that. I don't know if Kate Litvin remembers any of the gray literature that she reviewed, if there was anything about adolescents as caregivers. We certainly are seeing with social media and things like that adolescents are starting to be both sort of channels of norms, but also influencers. So I think that's an area that's really needing to be looked at. Claire, did you have an example you wanted to talk about?
Hi, thank you very much for the opportunity. Yes, just briefly, my name's Claire Hanbury and I'm the founder and director of Children for Health. We've worked with the government of Mozambique over many years on a nutrition and health program in a district of Mozambique where there's plenty of food, but chronic undernutrition to sort of 38%. And what we were looking at specifically in our intervention was recognizing the role that the children aged between about 10 and 14 play in quite a substantial number of the things that you just mentioned, the what, the why, and the how. And it's extraordinarily how influential these children can be in their families. And if we also, those of us who are parents, how subversive that influence can be with children asking us for things and asking not for things and so on. And particularly in communities where the parents themselves may not have gone to school. So I could talk to you for hours about this project. There's quite a lot on our website about it. But we turned one of the findings into a storybook, actually, which is called Everyone Counts. And it's about how they moved their staple diet from a white maize meal into a brown maize meal, because one of the causes of the chronic undernutrition and the lack of micronutrients is the use of the highly processed maize. Now, we may think, oh, that's just a small change, but in that particular community, it's a massive change. And it was down to the children almost taunting the community, not directly their parents, but naming this maize, the white maize, Chima Zero. So, and then the parents would ask, and it was a conversational starting point and blah, 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 blah. And so that was just one way, one of very, very many, and they were influential on breastfeeding and hygiene and all sorts of other things. So I think we underestimate the role of children and adolescents at our peril, and we need to find ways of really involving them, which really excites them. Because once they take ownership and they get excited about that, they're a real force to be reckoned with. So anyway, I better stop.
That's great. Thank you so much. What was the name of that project?
It's called the Participation of Children in Learning and Action for Nutrition, and there's information on the website Children for Health, of
Okay.
FOR, not 4 as a number.
Okay.
I can link in the chat.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you. Well, and there was another question about influencing adolescents' diets. And how norms come into that. And so it's almost like a double win if you influence the adolescents about their own diets, and then they also have an impact on the family and on the community. That makes a lot of sense. Are there particular things we should focus on at this point, Lisa? Oh, Kate was talking about, yeah, most of the literature that we reviewed was about primary caregivers, mothers, and then grandmothers and fathers. And I do know that there was one other project that used a children's book, and I can't remember exactly what that project was called, but it was more targeted at the parents if they were reading the book to their child about a strong and healthy child, then they would absorb the information. So it wasn't really going through the child because that was aimed at very young children.
Good, but this is also bringing up some gaps in the published literature that I think we can all try to work on filling. That sounds like an important point.
Great. And then there was a comment from Kirk Dearden about the Cambodia Project and how innovative that was, using a variety of different approaches, the norms plus the availability of fish in the market. And I think that's a really good point. We're thinking that norms are important, but they're only one piece of a larger set of behavioral determinants that involve women's time, which is partly related to norms, but not fully, and then economic constraints, food availability. And so it doesn't make sense to just think this is all about convincing people of a certain norm. It's looking at the full picture of the different determinants and not overlooking norms. Are there other questions? Just looking at the chat. I don't know if you wanted to comment on that comment on the Cambodia Project.
Well, you might put the TV spot link into the chat just in case, because that was focused on the adolescent helping the younger siblings in Cambodia.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. But we are really close to time, so I want to thank our speakers so much for time and effort to learn together as we're continuing to build out this important area of nutrition. And thank you all for joining and your comments and questions. And hopefully we'll have another opportunity to continue this learning. So thank you very much, Daniela. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Lisa, and to all of our speakers. The presentation was amazing, and it helped pointing out how social norms are related to maternal health and child nutrition, and also the importance of engaging with communities in order to improve the child feeding. So thank you so much for that. So we'll go to the second presentation. And for that, I will have the presentation about delivering nutrition programs at scale using implementation science to strengthen design and delivery of child and adolescent nutrition programs. For that, I welcome the next presenter. He will be Mdu. So I hand it over to you.
I'll unmute myself first. Thank you for the introduction. And thanks to the previous group, Lisa and team, for the interesting discussion. So I'd like to welcome you all to today's panel discussion from the Society for Implementation Science in Nutrition. My name is Mdudu Zimbuya, and I'm CISN's Chief Information Officer and working with the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition. And it's a pleasure to moderate this discussion of today's panel discussion on using implementation science to strengthen the design and delivery of child and adolescent nutrition programs. So just a little bit of housekeeping as we get started. I think would encourage you to introduce yourself in the chat box, again, if you haven't done so already, and that you keep the questions coming in chat, and look forward to you unmuting yourselves and turning your cameras on for the presentation, for the Q&A session. So just to, by way of introduction, before I bring on the panelists, those who have heard me talk about this topic before will recognize this this slide, which is quite illustrative. And the point that this makes is that implementation is about directing resources to the lever that will drive the most change. But as this cartoon illustrates, more resources will not necessarily lead to more results. So clearly, this gentleman knows that ladders will help him achieve his purpose, but it's difficult to infer from this image why he isn't achieving his result. Is it that he had a good plan that was otherwise badly executed? Or did he set out to stack these ladders in this way? So if you give him more ladders, then eventually he'll get to the top of the wall. These questions, even though they're a little bit on the extreme side, illustrate why programs sometimes fail. And these kinds of questions are at the core of what the Society for Implementation Science in Nutrition seeks to do, or the discourse that we hope to help move forward. Okay, I'm trying to move to the next slide. So these are the goals and objectives of the Society for Implementation Science in Nutrition. We seek to convene, advocate, disseminate, and promote dialogue among scientists, policy leaders, government officials, funders, and practitioners. And we were encouraged that the core group engaged in discussions with us and encouraged us to bring this discussion to this forum. And we look forward to hearing some perspectives from these actors. I won't spend time on this, but I'll just illustrate them. A framework that that CISN has developed and published in 2019, which is adapted from Darmschroeder's Consolidated Implementation Framework, but adapted to be more pertinent to the nutrition context. The utility of this is that the framework calls out the interactions between 5 domains, essentially objects of implementation, implementing organizations, the enabling environment, individuals, households, and communities who often participate in programs, and the implementation process and all of the issues that are entailed in that. And it is the interaction between all of these components that lead to implementation outcomes. And in an iterative manner, when we think about the AAA cycle of assessment, analysis, and action, we optimize the connections between these pieces to achieve our objectives. So what we what we hope to achieve with this panel discussion is to understand or discuss how researchers and implementers in two examples of delivering adolescent nutrition programs in Bangladesh have worked together or are working together to link knowledge to effective action while overcoming challenges in resource allocation, data generation, and decision making, and then illustrate and discuss opportunities, hopefully with your active engagement on where implementation science or these kinds of interactions can enhance program delivery in your context or other contexts. So just some quick data points on adolescent nutrition in Bangladesh to frame our panelists' discussion. Among adolescent girls in Bangladesh, stunting remains high and overweight is increasing, as illustrated by these data from 2011 through 2014, which highlight that even though there have been slight declines, over a quarter of adolescent girls are stunted, and overweight or obesity is on the increase, and along with other health indicators. And this is one of the reasons why many organizations or many players have seen it as important to intervene or to improve diets and outcomes for adolescent girls for many reasons. And there are different approaches being considered, being undertaken that touch on why, how, and where to intervene and towards what end. Illustrated here is a pledge, I think, touching on some of the points that were made in the previous session, that adolescents can be drivers of social norms. And in this project, over 1 million of them have pledged to eat well and live well. And we'll hear about some examples from our panelists. So we are privileged to have Chowdhury Jalal from CISN and Nutrition International, who will speak through considerations of integrating adolescent nutrition into multiple sectors. And also he'll be followed by Inka Barnett from the Institute of Development Studies, who will talk about implementation research that's currently underway and perhaps share some emergent observations from the researcher's perspective. And last but not least, Rahul Rawat from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation will bring in the donor perspectives in balancing implementer researcher trade-offs and also funding implementation research. So we're grateful for their willingness to share these experiences. And without further ado, I invite Jalal to jump in and share his insights. So over to you, Jalal, if you can unmute, turn your video on, and take on the floor. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. I do not have a presentation as such. I don't have a slide, but I wanted to reflect on our experience with working with one of the largest NGO in the world, BRAC, in terms of integrating nutrition into multiple sectors within BRAC. And this is related to adolescent nutrition. And there are two important things that we considered in doing so. And it was an iterative process of understanding how integration should be done. And finally, we came up with two major important factors that needed to be identified and explored further. The first was doing a PIP, a program impact pathway analysis of individual BRAC programs in terms of knowing how they're working to achieve their desired impact. So starting from the headquarter level all the way down to the implementation at the field level, how their activities are going and how they have designed in terms of achieving their program impacts. We then disintegrated those program components in BRAC, because it's a very large organization. Within each program, they had multiple interventions. So we disintegrated those, trying to find avenues and components of interventions that we could use for adolescent nutrition. So some of the programs, for example, the BRAC Health program did have some nutrition interventions there, but it does have other programs such as the BRAC education program, social development programs, agriculture, food security, and not all of them had nutrition in it. So what we did was, as we went along trying to explore the different components of each program, we realized that there are potential avenues, potential components that can actually integrate nutrition and effectively reach the adolescents. Again, adolescents are being reached mainly by BRAC's education program, but not necessarily have a nutrition component in it. So what we did at the end is trying to get, once all the programs are disintegrated, we picked up the different components of each program to see whether or not nutrition interventions, it could be in a material intervention, it could be commodity intervention, it could have been just a behavior change intervention through messages. So we had this set of work done, but at the same time, we needed to understand the adolescent girls' perspective with regard to their own perspective with regard to nutrition and food and diet. And it was really helpful because, away from the norm, that we believe that the adolescents would be more educated because in Bangladesh education is free until grade 12, so they would know more about nutrition from their education. That was actually not the case. They do know nutrition a lot, but in terms of really thinking from their own perspective, their diet as well as their body image perspective, things actually goes wrong. So they perceive food and nutrition in different ways that are not necessarily beneficial to their health and nutrition. So what we did was that helped us in developing how the BCI materials are going to look like. So that the behavior change intervention materials, as well as any interventions, we were focusing on IFA supplementation. That could be, these two can be actually integrated through BRAC's different programs, and also the messages were further strengthened through different avenues, that the different touch points that the girls could have through different programs. So in general, the bottom line is that we do have to know more about the programs to maximize the potential that they have to reach the adolescents. And at the same time, we need to know the girls' perspective in terms of absorbing the messages, in terms of effectively utilizing the information as well as the intervention. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Jalal, for those insights. We'll come back to you with additional questions. Inka, can I invite you to take the floor?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mudu. So we are from the Institute of Development Studies. We are currently doing implementation research on a very innovative social media-based communication campaign to change adolescent food choices in Bangladesh. The campaign is run by GAIN and aims to trigger a social movement to change the snack food environment for adolescents in Bangladesh, and also to improve individual snack food choice behaviors among adolescents in Bangladesh. The campaign uses an innovative mix of social marketing and consumer-based strategies, including the commitment pledge that Mudu has already mentioned, that is a personal commitment of adolescents to make better snack food choices, but it's also a symbol for participation in this emerging social movement. Also important, I think, is to mention that the whole campaign is not framed as a healthy eating campaign for adolescents, but as a campaign that helps adolescents to fulfill their dreams. So a complete reframing of the healthy eating topic, because this is often not a very exciting topic for adolescents. For the implementation research, we use a mixed methods approach that is very strongly theory-based. We use contribution analysis, which basically means that we mapped out in very much detail all the change processes that are meant to be, or hopefully will be, triggered by the campaign, drawing a lot on theoretical literature on the evolution of social movements, and really drawing out assumptions, risk, unintended consequences for every step in a lot of details. And then with the qualitative and quantitative data collection, we try to test and explore all of these underlying assumptions and risks, and really try to find out what might be challenges in the implementation, what might be opportunities. And we have now done 3 data collection rounds, and in response to this, a lot of the implementation processes have been adapted. There were reframing of some of the key messages, and throughout, I think it has been a really dynamic process where the research team and the implementation team really had to work together really closely. There had to be a lot of openness on both sides to work together and listen to each other and adapt in response to finding from both sides. Also, the research team had to change a lot of their initial plans, as well as the implementation team, and hopefully it will make the whole intervention much more successful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Inka. Yeah, look forward to the questions from the group when we get to the discussion point. Can I invite Rahul to share your thoughts and observations, please?
Sure, thanks very much, Mdu. So I'll be taking a slightly different tack right now. I am not speaking to an adolescent implementation research project in Bangladesh, but sort of taking it in a different direction. And I'd like to speak a little bit about as a donor with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, what I see as the role of implementation research. So I think the first thing to recognize is that we are operating in a resource-constrained environment. We don't have enough resources to fund everything that needs to be done. There has to be some level of prioritization and an optimization for the outcomes that we're driving towards. I work for a private philanthropy that has the elimination of maternal and child undernutrition as one of its core program areas. But within that, there's a recognition of 2 things. First is that we have a set of proven interventions that, when scaled up, can reduce a substantial portion of the burden of undernutrition. But also that even with that, there remains a substantial residual burden for which we don't have solutions to address this burden, and we need to innovate and find new solutions. What I want to drive home is a message that in both these areas, scaling up proven existing interventions and identifying new interventions, there's a critical role of implementation research to help achieve those goals. So first, in the area of scaling up proven interventions, the modeled projections are that if you scale up a set of priority interventions to a certain level, you will address a substantial burden of the portion of undernutrition. But in reality, when you look at the data on where we are at with the effective coverage of those proven interventions, we're woefully short of what those model projections are. So just in that alone, and there are too many examples that we have time to go over, but we need to really think not about what impact those interventions have when scaled, but how we go about testing strategies to scale up those interventions. So that's in the area of proven interventions. In the area of innovation and new solutions, there's a lot of work going on to identify some really blue sky thinking and saying, okay, maybe in 10 years down the road, these can be adopted in our geographies, but also other things that are available maybe in higher income countries that could be adapted to low and middle income countries. But what is missing right now is the role of testing and iterative testing during the product development process to think about the system into which these new solutions will be absorbed, and doing implementation research to think about how can this new device, this new tool, this new intervention be absorbed by the frontline worker. How are they going to be screened? How are people going to be screened? Is it going to take longer using this new technology than existing technology? So, I mean, again, there are so many examples, but I just really want to drive home the point that in both identifying new solutions and scaling up existing interventions, there is a role for implementation research. And my very last thing is really a call to the research and program community to say that we really need to shift a mindset away from focusing entirely on evaluations of impact, studying the intervention impacts of implementation, but really focusing it and studying actually implementation of interventions, and that being a primary outcome. And there needs to be more collaboration in that area, more incentives for research and publication in that area, and certainly where I sit, implementation research is a very big focus of what we do. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Rahul, very much for those insights. Since we have under 10 minutes left, I think I would like to open the floor to you all for questions to our panelists, or any discussion points that you might have, rather than my packaged questions. But there's already a question from Lisa, whom I guess I can direct this to Jalal and Inka. Thanking you for sharing this process of understanding the interests and values of adolescent girls. So can you share more about the methods used for this? Jalal, maybe you can start off with your thoughts.
Well, I think in terms of the methods that we have used, it's basically bringing in the program impact pathway analysis to understand the programs, and bringing in the perspectives of the beneficiary, so that when you develop a new program for adolescents, you maximize the resources that are already there but underutilized, and do it in a way that actually fits the needs of the adolescents. Oftentimes we actually look at the adolescent nutrition needs from the perspective of whatever we know from mothers' perspectives, or from other notions. But it's very, very important to know the adolescent girls' perspective to have an effective intervention. The work has been very detailed in terms of how we did the PIPs to understand each programs, and how we disintegrated each of them, and how we inserted the interventions, different small intervention components for each within each intervention component to reach the adolescents. That's quite detailed. I'm actually not going into that detail now, but overall, this is what we did. Inka, did you want to add something?
Yeah, perhaps the the entrance point, as I mentioned already in the brief talk, the entrance point for the campaign, the GAIN campaign we are researching was really different. It started really with trying to encourage adolescents, both boys and girls, to think about their future ambitions, their future dreams, and then slowly introduce the idea that they have the responsibility to work to achieve their future dreams. And one of the important things for increasing the chances to reaching their dreams was to have a healthy lifestyle. And a healthy lifestyle, of course, means eating healthy. So the whole idea of healthy eating was really introduced, well, in a way, through the back door. First, adolescents kind of motivation was built, and then kind of the healthy eating is just a way of achieving what they want to achieve. So a completely different entrance angle, and I think this is really exciting and perhaps more sustainable than talking about healthy eating to adolescents.
Thank you both for that. There's a question, Rahul, I think there are many comments about your observations resonating, and a specific question to you from Shruti.
I just read it, so why don't I just go
thanks for that.
Faster, yeah. So great question, Shruti, and I see Elaine's comment about Nepal as well and USAID's focus, both excellent points. I'll say from a donor perspective, to put it very bluntly, any way that we can maximize the impact of every dollar invested is something that we should be interested in doing. So I think it's incumbent upon programmers and their partner evaluators or researchers to really push on this and say, you know, we want to test strategies to try to help achieve greater impact for every dollar invested. That has to resonate with the donor community. Second, I do think there needs to be incentives for researchers to focus on this. So it's great to see organizations like CISN in existence. I think it's really helping push this forward. We need to make sure journals start increasing their acceptance of papers focused on implementation research, and make that an incentive for academics as well. And then lastly, a focus on training as well. I mean, implementation science and implementation research is a rigorous discipline, and there are methods that are required to do this. And we need to train more people to really bring the bar for excellence higher. And I think there's a role for research universities in that as well. Over.
Thank you, Rahul. I'm afraid we've run out of time. So in closing, I'll just recap on some of the points that have been made. So a focus on implementation, a focus on training, a focus on impact and outcomes, but also some observations that were made were the importance of knowing more about girls' perspective in designing programs, and also the importance of framing so that we tap into aspirations of adolescents rather than bring the same messages about eating and nutrition that might not resonate. So thank you very much to our panelists for your perspectives, and thank you to everybody for tuning in and actively participating. Look forward to continuing the discussion offline. Have a good day all.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that presentation. We have run out of time, unfortunately, and well, we want to thank all the presenters, all the participants, and the speakers for this insightful discussion we had today on nutrition and why it's a key element for child and adolescent health. The presentations today, we learned about how social norms influence in positive or negative ways in the way people are feeding, and how it's important to engage with communities and community leaders. And we also learned from different points of views about how it's important to implement research in order to adapt and create different programs focusing on adolescents in order to have more impact with concrete examples and interventions of Bangladesh. So as we conclude this session, I want to welcome you to head back to the conference website to join the marketplace sessions. And also I wanted to tell you that you can still share some of your questions, some of your comments in the Google Doc. You can still write your names, the organizations you come from. We'll be highly appreciate your inputs in that. And thank you, everyone. See you in the next sessions.